I'm Sarah Augustine, the Executive Director and co-founder of the Coalition to Dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery. Our society now faces the stark consequences of ecological overshoot, including climate change. Many of us from Christian traditions wish to resist systems of power in a proactive way, but we most often participate in performative actions rather than engaging in systems change. Many of us do not know how to approach systems change. Indigenous peoples have successfully lived sustainably within their ecosystems because they've built systems designed to do this. Let us consider together how we might do so by consulting with Indigenous experts. Thank you for joining us again for our speaker series. It is my great privilege today to introduce Dr. Wendsler Nosie Sr. Wendsler has an introduction here, and I'm going to read it in its entirety. So Dr. Wendsler Nosie Sr. is a former Peridot District Councilman and Tribal Chairman of the San Carlos Apache Tribe, which consists of nearly 17,000 tribal members on the San Carlos Apache Reservation. San Carlos stretches across Gila, Grisham, and Pinal counties, totaling 1.8 million acres, and is situated in the southern portion of the state. Wendsler was born on July 10, 1959, at the San Carlos Apache Reservation. He was raised in the traditional Apache way of life. He graduated from the Globe High School in May 1978 and attended Merritt College in Oakland, California, Phoenix College in Phoenix, Arizona, and completed the State of Arizona Banking Academy. Dr. Nosie specializes in bioethics, sustainability, and global public health. Following college, Wendsler Nosie returned to San Carlos and began his employment as the Tribal Work Experience Program Director in 1982. In 1988, he was elected to the Tribal Council for the Peridot District, which governs the San Carlos Apache Tribe through its amended constitution and bylaws, being federally recognized in 1954 through the U.S. Indian Reorganization Act. Wendsler Nosie then founded Rural Opportunities of Arizona in 1990, an individually owned business owned and operated by a tribal member, which provided opportunities for tribal members to become skilled in trade and trained for jobs throughout Arizona. In 1995, Wendsler established Apaches for Cultural Preservation and founded the Spirit of the Mountain Runners in 2000, which is a traditional runners organization. Wendsler Nosie was reelected as the Tribal Council representative for the Peridot District in 2004 to serve another 4-year term. It was then he was inspired to run for tribal chairman. Then in 2006, he was elected by the San Carlos Apache people as their tribal chairman. He was recognized in 2006 and given an honorable mention by Wake Forest University of Winston-Salem, North Carolina, for his coordination bringing students from Wake Forest to the San Carlos Apache Reservation for a cultural integration program, and was also recognized and honored in 2007 by the National Council of Churches from New York City for his accomplishments in Indian country as a leader of spirituality among youth and organizing many events for over 15 years, which includes having worldwide participation in sacred runs in protection of Native American culture, tradition, and heritage. The National Council of Churches comprises over 30 million membership throughout the nation. Wendsler Nosie Sr. became an executive committee member of the Arizona State Democratic Party, District 1, and introduced the resolution which established the Arizona Native American Democratic Caucus. He was the first Native American electorate member of the National Electoral College for Arizona in Obama's first term as president. He established the Apache Messenger newspaper in 2011 and owns and operates the newspaper currently. He received the honor of being added to the Globe High School Hall of Fame for sports. In 2010 and again in 2012, Wendsler Nosie Sr. was reelected as tribal council for the Peridot district. Wendsler has been instrumental over the course of his political career with the tribe in establishing the Apache Gold Casino, Bashas, and currently the Peridot District Enterprises, which includes Apache Burger, True Value Hardware, PDEE Shopping Center, etc. He has also been appointed as the San Carlos Recreation and Wildlife Director and has marketed and expanded the hunting and recreational area of the tribe. In 2013, Wendsler Nosie Sr. received the Presidential Award from the National Progressive Baptist Convention for his fight for human rights for all Native Americans. He is the first Native American to receive such an award. Dr. Wendsler Nosie recently accepted a position with the American University of Sovereign Nations as a professor in the practice of Indigenous knowledge, where he will be teaching a range of Masters and Doctoral program courses to students from around the world. Wendsler is married to Theresa Beard Nosie, a member of the Navajo Nation. They reside in Peridot, Arizona, on the San Carlos Apache Indian Reservation, and have 6 children and 17 grandchildren. Wendsler is a long-distance runner and has participated in numerous marathons and half marathons over the years. He is dedicated to the preservation and protection of Native American culture, artifacts, history, religion, and tradition. He is the leader of the Apache Stronghold and director of Gone by Gauze, where he continues to advocate for Indigenous religious and human rights and protecting the future of our next generations to come. Welcome. We're so glad that you're with us, and what a privilege it is to be with you. And so just on a personal level, I want to share with those people who are joining us and who are going to be watching this video into the future, that Wendsler is, from my point of view, a civil rights leader in the United States and North America, and is the person that is leading the Apache Stronghold and the struggle for Oak Flat and Mount Graham. It's just a privilege to have you here, Wendsler, and I am so proud to have the opportunity to get to connect with you in my lifetime. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thank you.
Okay, so I want to just frame this question for you. In this series, we're really asking for Indigenous leaders to respond from your own cosmology. In the context of capitalism, our society is really based on this transactional model of capitalism. And capitalism as a system is really the unit of analysis is the individual, and the output is profit. So our whole society is based on individuals pursuing profit for themselves. And the question that we're really asking in this series is to reflect on, from your cosmology, what else could a society be based on? So we're really asking Indigenous leaders, understanding that those people that are in the paradigm are really blind to it. So we're asking people from your cosmology, what else could you base a society on? And that's a really open-ended question. So I just invite you to talk about that broadly.
Okay. Well, again, thank you so much. And I think, like a lot of us, we never probably expected to be in these kind of positions. And I was just telling a group of young men yesterday that just coming from the reservation itself, and I remember being in my bedroom around 12 years old, and just looking at what life that I had lived already, and wondering where I would be, and but really reflecting on, I guess, my entire life, meaning, from my parents to my grandparents, and the question of like, well, why am I here? Why am I here? And as you get a little bit older, because you're paying attention, you find that a lot of the realities around you isn't meant for you. And you try to figure it out. And I think like they always talk about foundations, foundations are so critical because that's when these kind of obstacles hit, you tend to fall back. But if you don't have a foundation, a really solid foundation, then how are you going to ricochet back? How are you going to bounce back? And, a lot of these words that I reflect today, really goes into the upbringing of my mother. And I tell people to even understand what I'm talking about, you have to go back. And so what I tell people, I remind people that the San Carlos Apache Tribe, the reservation itself, didn't become a reservation, till the 1930s. And, as far as being established in the early 1800s, but, prior to that, it was a prisoner of war camp where, people were brought here. And then it became a concentration camp, then eventually a reservation. So being that my mother was born in the early 1920s, my father, they were prisoners. They're in a concentration camp. Then you look at their parents and my grandparent, you look at their parents, and they were brought in forcefully as young people, into San Carlos. Then you take my grandfather, Nahaji, who was at that time with Geronimo and all this things that were going on and these changes that were going to take place for the future. And so, and I can go back and back and back, but, that's the foundation I come from. So if you look at me born in 1959, I'm first born reservation to my parents, So I try to tell people and remind them how recent that was for us. That's really recent. And so, that really sets up the foundation of the timeline. And the timeline is so critical that understanding what happened in those events give you a clear indication like where you are right now. I mean, to understand these words of colonization, capitalism, because those words were not used during the time of my great-grandparents, And when I reflect back onto our people, and particularly my family, is that you go back and you look at your clanships, you look at the tribe you originated from. So it's just like anything else, there's the word Apache, but within that Apache, there's so many different tribes of Apache. Then it breaks into your clanship. So even that, you go to a greater number. And so when you look at San Carlos has 15 different types of Apaches. So San Carlos reservation, prior to the reservation, was really the boiling pot where they brought all the people as prisoners of war. And so, and then from there, we have the different clans. So with me, every family has a story. And for me, my great grandfather Nahaji, during the time of Geronimo, was caught a month after Geronimo was exiled out of here. So with him and a few others, it was too, the government felt, it wasn't necessary to send that small of a group to catch up with the rest of them that were being exiled out of Arizona. And so they brought my great grandfather here to San Carlos as a prisoner of war. And so that's how I'm here yet. Other than that, if he was caught the same time with Geronimo, I probably wouldn't be speaking with you today, because then I don't know what the end results would have been too if he would have made it there. So the foundation is so critical because when I was growing up here on the reservation, my grandfather, my dad, his brothers, his sister, they were intoxicated and they cried a lot. But as I was getting older, they would talk about going home. And they would say, they would speak it in our language, hey, he couldn't. Then they would laugh because they knew that it wasn't like a reality that was going to happen, that they would ever go home. And then there was the discussion about these real critical places of importance to us. in the way we are as people and how we were removed from these places. But see, they couldn't put their finger on it because the people back then had were saying in Apache, but in English they were saying, "What did we do to them? What did we ever do to them?"
Mm.
And so what they were acknowledging was all this transition that was going on. They didn't know why. They didn't know why, and they couldn't put their finger on it that these critical things were this new change was happening to them, but they couldn't put their finger on it. And so anyway, so I grew up in that time. I grew up in that era, and in that time, they still had a lot of federal policies where they were taking second, Theresa. They were in that time they were still hang on one second. Theresa, somebody's knocking. Somebody's at the door. Yeah, I apologize. So anyway, they were they didn't understand what was happening. You know, their whole foundation was broken. You know, and they were trying to hang on to what they could hang on to, and were really saying out loud, you know, what did we do to them? So then you go back to the Chiricahuas, you go back to my family bloodline. In our story, when Geronimo was brought here was a prisoner, and he seen the conditions, all he wanted to do was go home because they lied to him. If you look at the desert area that we live in today versus the Chiricahuas where we come from. And so they talk about the big lie that these papers, these people threatened those peoples that were out to go kill them, were out to do this stuff. And so, you know, it really affected the people to where, you know, they just didn't know what to do anymore. So like I tell people, take yourself, you know, you're in this room with me, and now I tell you, you're not going anywhere. You know, you make do with here. I said, that's kind of what happened to our people, because they don't talk about the lies that were spoken of to our people and how they ended up here. So anyway, I grew up in that time. And then on that, in those days too, was the federal policies I was saying, because prior to when my mom was a child, they were forcibly being taken and never to return. And those are those devastation things that you hear today, where kids are found in churches, you know, burial grounds and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's the era that my mother grew up in, to where a lot of them never returned. So then when it came to her children, and I come from a family of 7, I have 6 other siblings with me, and my sisters that graduated in 61, 63, you know, they still had the relocation program, where they either went to the Bay Area in California, San Francisco, Oakland, Los Angeles, you know, Chicago, you know, they were exiled out of here too, to assimilate them. So my mother still lived in fear, and she couldn't really embrace her children because those policies still existed. And then here in Globe, Arizona, here just 20 miles away from the reservation, you know, all the way up to 1976, we still had, you know, dogs and Indians keep out. You know, we still weren't welcome to the restaurants in the Globe area. So you see the social effects, you know, in a complete of not understanding what was happening. And our people were trying to figure this out themselves with no help from the federal government. And this caused a lot of illness that we have today, the social problems. But what my mother described that as is, you know, when she used to tell me, this is post-war. This is how they left us, you know, with not knowing what we're about anymore and what we're supposed to do. And she used to say, though, that what you got to understand, son, is the last part of this is our spirit. They're going to come back after it. They're going to come back after our spirit. And so she took me and she really set me down. Because when I was in 8th grade, I made this public speech. And I remember, coming back beside her and I asked her, how did I do? And she was upset with me because I did talk about, pride. I did talk about, resistance. And, I sounded really good. But when I said beside her, she told me that I lied, using her, because she, English was the last language she ever spoke. So when I repeat her words, that's how she spoke to me. She said, you really lied. She goes, that's not who we are, because we have an illness. And she used the example of a raped woman, that a raped woman has two choices: one, to say it, or two, to hide it. And if you hide it, the children are affected because they'll never understand why the mother couldn't be the mother she could be. So she was saying that for us people, it's like that, because nobody wants to listen to us. We ran here, we ran there, we went here, and she more or less, she was talking about like the churches, the federal government who came in, made all these promises. And so that's what she was referring to, because there was no help ever being received by any of them, except the transition. You couldn't be this anymore. This is who you got to be. So she really began to sit with me and tell me the dark side of what happened to the people. And she was hurt. I mean, she didn't like the fact that she had passed this on to her children. Because in that time, there was really no hugging. A lot of people would say, wow, the Apaches are really tough. They're really, they don't hug, they don't wave, they don't smile. But there was a reason for it, because you couldn't really build that relationship because your children are going to be gone.
Yeah.
So I tell people that, they get upset with President Nixon, but if it wasn't for President Nixon giving us the self-determination, then where we would be right now. No other president after him has done anything really major like he did.
Yeah.
We may have not gotten the entitlement to the land, but we had entitlement now to say what we wanted to say. So if you go back to that era, which nobody talks about, you'll find the United States Congress and everyone really upset with President Nixon for allowing that for Indian people, because then it gave us a voice that we didn't have before. It gave us the ability to make these decisions that we didn't have before. But what happened though, like you go back to my mother's time, they didn't know how to use that. So like in the late 70s and 80s, I can only speak for here, they were still trying to figure this whole thing out. But what was cute about the whole thing, the priority for them was this change. Okay, to talk about the change, let me go back spiritually. So we're raised with the holy ones and the elders that are no longer here. What they left behind was, they said that this evil that destroyed the other side of the world came here already. But the difference when it came here was the whole native people on Turtle Island were all in one sequence. And they talk about the prayer, they talk about the circle, and they talk about the drum. Because when you go to all the drums in Turtle Island, it's the heartbeat of the mother. So we all had that understanding. And along the side of the heartbeat of the mother, it had other elements that tied to it. So I can only speak about Apaches, is that our drum has the water inside of the drum that represents the ocean. The sacred stones in the drum represents our tie to Mother Earth. And the stick that we use has to come from a tree that's struck by lightning, because when we flick our wrist to drum, that stick represents lightning hitting the earth. And then the sound of the drum, boom, 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 it's the thunder. So all these drums in Turtle Island had a significant meaning to the creation and to our identity. So anyway, that was along with the prayer. And then in Turtle Island, you always have the hoop and a circle. And in Apache, no different than anybody else in this country that are native, it's called bonsai. And bonsai is the hoop of the mother. And it has a lot of significant meanings to it. So that is bonsai, which is the circle. And then you have the prayers of the people, which was the old way before Jesus ever came. It was no different than where the Bible came from. It was at that time, which was still ongoing, you know. So it was one drum, you know, one circle, one prayer. So what we talk about here is that when that evil came here, it couldn't penetrate because everybody knew who God was. Everybody knew the purpose. So what they say is that it gave this smirk and told the people here that he'll be back. And with a smirk, he left. So from that day on, the people talk about this evil and they were watching for it. But when the white people came in our part of the country, when they came, we have no word of segregating. And it was your relative, just of a different skin color, but they had to be, you know, a part of us. And so the shields went down and the trust of who we are stepped up to help these people. But we didn't know what they were here for. And then when that big transition happened, when they started to kill and started to take, started to incarcerate, in our people, they would say that these were the worst people on the earth. And so we more looked at them as evil. But it bothered the old people because when they first approached us, they didn't act like that. And so, believe it or not, it's like from that time we were put as prisoners of war, the people still gave them a chance. And what they were doing was dissecting them. And the way they were dissecting them was what they were trying to do to us and what they were trying to make us to be, was to be like them. And so, and I go back to the like late 70s, early 80s, and my mother included when she was alive, and all these elders that I knew that are no longer here. I just remember them being so excited because it's like they found the answer. They found it. So in Apache, there's no words for colonization or capitalism, but everything they talked about, they referred to that. And what they were excited about was, that's where the evil is at. That's how it got here. Because it brought these people like us to meet us and we accepted them and our trust went down. Then this ugliness of colonization and capitalism took over and the dirty work began. And so, like I said, they could not put their finger on it until the late 70s and early 80s. And I remember that time they were just so excited, you know, and at that point in my life, it really pushed me to assess the so-called America. Then everything I just said to you prior that about this foundation that America sits on, it's a false foundation that they sit on. It's an illusion with everything they talk about based on capitalism that corporations have, you know, are sitting right there in line too, which is a deception to not only Native people, but all the people of the country. Then it took us to go back to Europe. And I remember before my mother passed, I was going to Europe and it was really cute. she, in her own Apache way, she was telling me, "Oh, you're gonna go back to the other side, where all these people came." She was like really, I mean, she was really serious about it. And when I was getting ready to go, she says to me, she goes, "Son, you're gonna do me a favor." She says, "When you go back there, you're gonna meet the people that these people come from. That's like the old world over there." And she said, "Tell those people to tell these people over here to behave." I, I mean, and in one of my speaking engagements there in Italy, I had to tell the crowd, because I did not want to not do what my mother asked me to do. So I did it, and the response was huge. I mean, and it's like what I find in what I've been doing for all these years is so many people are afraid to talk about it.
Hmm.
So many people are to admit to it. And it takes me back to my mother when I was telling you earlier that when she told me, you can't hide it. You have to speak the truth. You're a victim. If
Hmm.
if you speak from the victim of who we are, then you're going to heal. But if you hide it by being angry, by being, resisting and not wanting to learn, she says, because you got to remember, because what we were talking about was when I became the chairman of the tribe, uh, and I don't know if they do this for all tribal leaders around the country, but anyway, getting back to Apache, getting back to the United States, know I'm a Cherokee. They know that I was elected into the tribal seat here, and they know all about us. They can't say they don't. They know all about us. So now here I am, my family, prisoners of war, come in. I'm living with the Apaches. The majority are scouts from descendants of scouts. So I'm living more or less like a prisoner within the reservation, also by my own people. But time changes. I get elected. The United States knows I'm the chairman now. So they invite me to the United to they invite me to Washington. So I go to Washington and then I spend 3 days there. And I remember clearly they took me to the Pentagon and they showed me, what they do and what they're about. Then they took me to the judicial system, to the courts, and they told me the power that they have. Then they took me to the House of Congress and explained to me all these laws. Then I went. My last stop was with not actually the president, but with his staffers, and they reminded me that our reservation is an IRA reservation and that it was created by an executive order. And so all of a sudden I'm on a plane, coming home back to Arizona. And I'm like, I'll use better choice words, but I was like, the hell? What was this visit about? It had nothing to do about what the United States was going to do, continuing in helping the tribe and all the federal programs, or what's the future of the tribes, how they see. But it was all about their power.
Hmm.
So I remember coming home and like I was saying, and just trying to really understand what this whole trip was about. And so, of course, again, like I said, my mother was still alive, and I went over to see her, and I was telling her about the visit and the trip, and she says to me, she said, "So you really don't understand why they did that?" And I said, "Well, not really." I said, "I have an idea," but then she looked at me and she said, "Son, you're an Apache, you're a native." She said, "They're showing you their power. They're showing you you can't fight them. You can't do anything. Everything is in their favor." So what she was talking about was the system being a monopoly. And by her telling me that, really pushed me again to begin to study, like the state of Arizona, to study the federal governments and how the systems are put together and how did it all begin, my visits to Europe and talking to the European people there, and then spending time in the East Coast and talking to a lot of non-natives, white, blacks, everybody. And it really pushed me there to really learn this America. What is this America all about? And but she really helped guide me to what I needed to really investigate. And so I did. And like I said, I come back to, why the federal government, made that trip for me was to make sure that I continue to be obedient, you know, to not ruffle anyone's feathers. And then it made me look at the Constitution of the tribe, and it also made me look at my oath of office, because there are all requirements in there that I adhere to the will of the government. So if you look at a tribal politician, if they're not adhering to the United States government, anybody running against them, their opponent, can easily remove them because they're not in compliance between the tribe and the United States government. So it really made me look at the fine lines of what was written and how it was written, and how it prevented us. But I got to go back to my mother again, because what she told me, she says, it's like you're walking this trail every day, and all of a sudden somebody comes behind you and you don't know, and they spook you, and you jump. And when you jump, you lost focus. She says that's what happened to us Indian people, is that when all this came into play here, we lost focus of who we were. And she says, what I'm saying is that we all have something great that they don't have because they lost it. And she said, that is our spiritual connection to the mother.
Mm-hmm.
She says, so you can go and try to fight them. You can go and do all these different things. So she says, but you got to be smart, because the same results will happen to you that has happened to everybody.
And so if we spend all of our life energy just, fighting one thing after another and not the systems themselves, then we just get sucked into this perpetual, like you can never win, because, you might win one fight, but then you'll lose the next 10.
So she used to say, she used to use the Grand Canyon for example. She used to say, probably at one time that Grand Canyon wasn't as big as it is. She says, but people could converse from standing on one side to the other. But as it got huge, now they can't converse. So she said, that's how life is. So she goes, what I'm saying is that back a long time ago, there are going to be people falling through the crack. You can jump down there and help them to get across. But a lot of people are crossing over already. But now with this new American system, it's like this, and more people are falling in the hole. So son, she goes, you have a choice. You can jump down there and help everybody, but what's going to happen is you're not going to come out. So you have to understand and bring those two cliffs back together. And she tells me, that's where I'm telling you that we lost our focus. She goes, you're going to have to find that focus and know what it is. So in my lifetime, what she was referring to was, if we're going to keep the system, she was referring to that it's our children. Our children, we have to teach our children. And really, it's telling them the truth, how colonization and how capitalism and how corporations all work together to put this massive control on all of us. And so she reminded me, she says, that you got to remember that they say like a 90% of us were wiped out from the face of the earth. But those who pray real hard, that's why we're still here. That's why you're here. She says, but you have to make sure that you understand that now you're going to have to find those people, meaning like the non-Indian community, because a lot of them too were saying that it was wrong killing all these Indians. Now you're going to have to find their children. So she was saying to me again, coming back, more or less I was figuring out everything that she was talking about. And so what I done was taking the road of looking at all, like I said earlier, going to Europe, going to about 5 different countries, and sitting down and talking with so many of them. And then coming to the East Coast and talking to so many of those people, and then the West Coast. So I spent most of my life, going outside my boundaries. Because here in San Carlos, I'm proud to say that we took a look at ourselves and we said, is this who we want to be? Is this where we're going? And because of those older people, like I was saying, in the late 70s and 80s, who were able to dissect and say, this is the problem, then I had turned the light on us. And I challenged my people first. Is this who we really are? You know, have we really given up? Have we really fallen to colonization and capitalism? Are we looking at capitalism as the answer to the future? Have we really discarded our mother? Have we really threw the mother away? Then I would reflect back and remind them that when we are born, or when our mother is conceived, the mother takes care of us when we're inside of her. You know, she has all these obligations and a way of life and taking care of the one in her stomach. But when the baby's time to be born, then you have the umbilical cord where now the child comes out. But you still have the responsibility of teaching the child. Once the umbilical cord is cut, meaning right at birth, that's when the powerful stones come in. And so when a girl is born, she gets a white stone from the earth with the feather. And when the boy is born, it's a blue stone with the feather. So as soon as that umbilical cord is cut, the child is given a new umbilical cord that ties the child to the Mother Earth. Mm-hmm. So from that day on, the child is crying, it's already attached to the mother. So from that point on, the teaching begins about how critical Mother Earth is to us, and our purpose of being here and taking care of our mother. So the child is raised at that point. And especially when it's a girl, because now a girl is going to carry on the old traditional ceremony of the beginning of time immemorial. That's what we're fighting for at Oak Flats, because that place is going to be destroyed. That this is where that gift also resonated from. Then the boy has the responsibility to care for Mother Earth, but he has to go through many different ceremonies, and the sweat lodge being the most critical one, because it ties your mind and your heart together of a discipline. Because what they say is that if the boy does not go through these ceremonial requirements, then they say he's like a horse, meaning that the man will have no respect for the women anymore, because there's nothing binding him to these sacred ways. And that's the same thing that happens at Oak Flats. So those things were real critical. It's still critical to us. We still do it today. And that's what makes up who we are, and how we're able to look at colonization and capitalism as one trying to destroy this from us, so we have no link to the mother, so that colonization can capitalize on everything that the Mother Earth is to make it a profit for themselves. In the meantime, that's their way of destroying who we are. So getting back to when I was in Europe, I was really happy to find many white people that still had their indigenous ways. Mm-hmm. And I was sad to go to many places where many of them died for not turning to Christianity. Mm-hmm. And there's still those who live with the government not giving them help or really providing for them, because they haven't embraced any kind of religion. And then you go to Africa, and the same thing. When I met with the African people, their whole mural, their whole story is similar to us. It was easy to identify that. And then the same thing when I met with, the Orientals or the Asians, they, their story was how, they were colonized, but then when they took those leadership roles, they kind of, moved forward with colonization as well too, even though they were indigenous people. But they're somewhat not happy with themselves, like all of us are, because they're not able to be who they want to be. So then I come to the East Coast, and I'm giving a lot of speeches in the East Coast, and I have a lot of them come up to me and tell me that I lose them when I start talking about ancestors. I lose them when I can go back and back and back. And so they explained to me why. They said, it's because when these Europeans who came to America, the new land forced them to cut their ties of where they came from.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were assimilated in that way. They were for, if you're, Irish, Italian, some of these other groups that were really hit hard, they were forced to be Americans. And so they like my conversations because I tell them there's no such thing as American people. You came from somewhere, an American. If you say you're an American, I said, that's like an illusion. That's not who you are. It's a made up myth. I said, by corporations that have done this to the people. I said, so in order to understand what we're doing as Native people, because you're indigenous as well, you have to go back. You have to open up those doors that either you were forcibly to close it, or either you had to for your safety. I said, but now you're going to have to go back on your religious position. You're going to have to go back because that makes you understand God's greatest gift that he gave us all. And that's the Mother Earth. I said, this colonization that happened way back when, in your days, in the European days, back then, I said, is here, but it was never over. I said, so what I'm trying to tell you, I said, I feel the chains around my ankles, around my wrists, trying to pull me to be somebody I'm not. I said, but when I look at you, you have the same thing on. The only difference is that you've been living it since way back when. I said, so when you hear me talk, you're probably hearing your great, 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 great grandfather talk that didn't agree with what was going on. Because of all this suffering. Because I said, remember, you guys put yourself in slavery. You guys did all that stuff to yourself until you figured you could do to everybody else. Colonization, those that were in control, that now is like the stockholders, the owners, those are the ones I'm talking about that created all this, the kings and queens, all that. I said, now we're at a point where you have to ask yourself the biggest question, because we do. And then we say, like an Apache, Hadunga dita wa kuninya in nehi, the wa hako, Hadunga kuninya. Like, so somewhat in like an angry way, they're saying, why did all these people come here? Why did they come to America? Then you have the saying that dita wa, di cheating he kunin lihi. Like all these people who lived on that side, that's where evil was at. So the Wampel called, all of them prayed for a better day, a better way. And it led them here to us because we were still one drum, one prayer, one circle. And it brought them to us. But that's how the evil jumped on their back and did what they did to us. But we're able to survive. So now comes to where we're all in this together. And that's what I tell the people of this country.
I want to just interrupt you there for a minute and ask you, so you're talking about, when you were talking about colonialism or settler colonialism specifically, so you said colonialism is no link to the mother, you're sort of untethered, so you can go wherever. And that idea of leads to thinking of the earth as a commodity. And that's where capitalism comes in, so that you can capitalize on the goods of the mother. And so you're talking about settler colonialism, which you said it's never over because it's still happening, right? So for you and for me, our people, the process of colonization is ongoing. It hasn't come to an end because we're still alive, right? So we're still dealing with that process. But you're talking about asking people from the dominant culture, white people, to open the doors to their own people and think about, where did you come from and what was that ancient knowledge from your own people that is the same as one prayer, one drum, one circle. So I guess my question is just trying to get at least a little bit from you about the spiritual grounding. What is that grounding and the connection to the earth for the San Carlos Apache or for the Apache stronghold? Because I know I've heard you speak many times about that spiritual grounding that you're saying, as your mother said, the wisdom to pass on to the children is this connection to the mother and prayer. And so what is that connection? Because we're really trying to think through, how do we recreate our society, our communities, ourselves, our homes, our families, to be consistent with reality and reject this this illusion that what you called an illusion, which is capitalism and settler colonialism. So what is that grounding, the spiritual level?
Well, as I was saying earlier, it really starts at birth, and it really starts in understanding who the mother is, and then going back to the beginning of time. I mean, and for us Apaches, for us natives, I guess we are a lot better off than a lot of people because we still hold on to that. Mm-hmm. And when we speak to non-natives, I see it emotionally affecting them because they're looking and searching for theirs as well. But it tells me how complicated they make this. And so I guess I got to go back to, like, we have to understand too where we go wrong and understand. I mean, we have to understand it. So in other words, when the first ball rolled to the child and Geronimo told the child, don't touch it because that'll change you forever. So even as Native people, what we look at right now is we're still not clean because we're touching the very thing that destroys the earth. So that's why the dissecting of understanding, this whole process, because in the beginning, as we say, there was 4 great gifts that were given the world to how to care for the mother. And of course, Native people were given the care of the mother, of knowing how to talk to the mother and to how to care for the mother. That was our gift. Then you come to the Asian people who were given the prayer of air. So they have the gift of helping the oxygen, the air that exists around the earth. So they were given that. Then the Black people were given the gift of water, of how that all connects with the Mother Earth and how they were given that gift. Then it comes to the white people. The white people were given the gift of fire. So what they say is that, and everybody else, we all come from these 4 great gifts. Everybody, I mean, I'm not leaving anybody else out. We all come from this. But what they said was that someone was going to abuse their gift. And what was told to us was, whoever that abuser is, we don't be angry with them. Bring them back into place. But the only difference now is you're going to have to share your water in your bucket with them because they lost so much. So when I look at what Native people are doing, what I'm doing is I'm pouring a lot of this back into a lot of non-natives to bring them back into compliance of understanding who the mother is. And what we see is that the mother has been really misplaced in this whole upbringing because of colonization. So we have to bring the mother back. And what they say is that your whole body is spiritual. So if you can begin to eat from the mother again, then you're receiving the right medicine. But as long as your entire food is coming from a company that's marketing it for profit and for self-gain, and they use that money to put into other researches, then you're falling into it. You should be knowing what you're eating. You should know what you're doing. And you have to wake up. So we say we have to wake up the people, because if you wake up the people, then they realize how important the mother is. So it all falls back to the mother, because that's one thing that we can all agree across the world, is that water and air are critical. We should always have that as 1 and 2, because that helps the mother. But in America, the United States government has the mineral resources, and has gold, copper, silver, and all that as a priority of life continuing. There's no discussion of water. There's no discussion of air. And yet those main priorities that the United States created is actually killing the mother. So, so anyway, it goes back to that. And I think for me is really begin to take that out and teach the rest of the people to hear how critical Mother Earth is in their lives every day, that not their fault, but they were misguided and not ever having that as a centerpiece for them anymore, because corporations, colonization, capitalism has really took the place of the mother. A false image took the place. And that's why I'm saying that the elders knew then where the evil was at. That's what we're fighting. So in my fight, I tell people it's like the train has already left the stage. It's too late to try to create anything or do anything. You have to jump on your belief. And if you jump on your belief, you're not going to go wrong, because that's the instincts that you have inside of you that we say, you don't even have to go to a preacher. You don't even have to go to a medicine man. God already gave it to you. Those people have something else that can help you understand other things. But as far as you have it already. So when I look at us Apaches, that colonization, what was happening here was taking that away from us. So what I'm doing is replanting, or not really replanting. I'm watering that seed for every tribal member, because you can pray for your child. You can take care. You're just as powerful. Even for your loved one who's ill. My mother and the old ones used to say, you're the most powerful one, because you love that child. You love, God will hear you. But we gave that away, to someone else to do that part. So the point is that when you understand the mother, you understand everything in it. So getting back to non-Indians, they tell me, wow, you guys are healing. What about us? What about us that came here? So there's a lot of examples. When we do our march, I have a lot of non-natives now joining. And I tell them, it's for you. I said, because you need to understand the world you live in. So of course, when non-natives walk with us, they hear from their own race, you Indian lover, what are you doing? You crazy? Oh, you must be retarded. And they get all this slander happening to them. And they're crying during this walk. And at the end, it's coming together, and me telling them that that's the world you live in. They're upset because you are now protecting the mother. I said, that's what we call evil. We have to know that it's there. By it voicing their words tells us that we're on the right track on spirituality. I said, but that's where you come from. And you have to understand that. I said, so, and then I go on to tell them too that my mother told me, she says to me, she says, son, when we're born in this world, there's not a instruction that comes with you. There's no instructions that tells you how you're going to be 2 years old, how you're going to be 5 years old, 20 years old, 30, and how you're going to be an elder. There's nothing that you read that tells you, the do's and don'ts. There's nothing. She says to me, she goes, son, that's everything in front of you. You have all these people, you have me, you have everybody in front of you. You're supposed to pick and choose what you want to be like and what you don't want to be like. So if there's things that I can do better and you see it, then do it better. Do it better than me. If I do something wrong over here, do it better. She says, that's why God gave you eyes to see. That's why he gives you a brain to think, to make those choices. Never think that God's going to make it for you 100%. He's going to come halfway, and you have to come halfway, because that's the greatest gift he gave you. So those instructions is the things that are ahead of you and in front of you. Then you set up yourself like that. So when I have non-Indians, and believe me, there's a lot of different things that they talk to me about, from marriages, from the way they live, from Oak Flats, it's just like way more than I have. And what I realize with them is that they have to marry for financial reasons. Because when they take me aside and they talk to me, every area of their their hurt in their life is because of financial the situation that they're in, and even when they get married. So anyway, I don't mean to use her name, but I don't mean to use her, but I'm not going to use her name. So she comes to me from Scottsdale, Arizona. She wants me to pray for her, and I tell her, I said, and the only reason I'm using this is because I get a lot of them like that. And anyway, she talked to me and she says, I came here because I want you to pray for me. This is going on. And I figure, you're a medicine man, I want you to pray. And I stopped her and I said, I'm not a medicine man. I said, I don't pray like that. And then she says to me, no, she goes, you are. And then I said, no, I said, I want you to know, I pray, but I don't pray for something like that. I said, then she says to me, she says, but Wendsler, she says, you're all over the place. You're helping so many people. You're doing so many great things. So from my perspective, she says, there's a spirit with you. And all I'm asking if you could pray for me. So I told her, I said, well, yeah, okay, I said, you put it like that, but I just want you to know. So anyway, so I pray for a lot of people like that, but let me use her problem. So her problem was that she was in love with this guy when she was young, but this family and the guy's family forced them to get married because the families knew each other. So they can keep all their stocks and bonds, they can keep all their business, and they could control, a part of the Democratic Party. So they could control it and the family can be influential. But that's why they got married. But they're not having a good life. So she says, how can I heal from that? And I looked at her and I said, I can't tell you to turn right, turn left. That's going to be you. I said, but I can tell you this. I said, do you have children? She goes, yeah. I said, then don't let the children live your life. That's your healing. I said, don't ever let your children do what you're doing. Let them have a good life. I said, because you got to remember, I said that if we brought children into the world and we're living this kind of life, then you owe it to them to talk to them in a different sense, but telling them, allow them to be with who they love. I said, just like us Apaches, we marry who we love. We don't marry because this is rich, this is poor. No, it comes from our mind and heart and our soul. I said, but in America, I said, so many of you are married for financial reasons. That's why we have the problems we have today, because that's within that corporate way of life. That's within capitalism. So I said, you have to recognize what that is. Once you start recognizing what capitalism is and what it's done to you, then you're going to find self-healing in that. Or either you're not. You're just going to live out the rest of your life. I said, but the answer to our problems is our children. Our children can change tomorrow if we're truthful and if we lead them in the right direction. So I said, that's your great love, is your children, because no matter what, I said, you love your children. And she, she cried and she goes, no, I never thought about that. I never thought that, I could change my children. I mean, have my children have a better life and better decisions. But see, that goes back to what's missing is how you tie the child back to the Mother Earth. And so as soon as the child is born for us, we tie him to the mother, because the mother teaches you all those moral and ethics, because when you go out the door, there's either, good air or not good air. There's something happening that you can see, all that is tools that God gives you and how you can recognize these things. But unfortunately, this capitalist and colonized way has taken that away from a lot of people. So what I find is feeding that back into the people. So it is, it is a process, but You know, there's so many children born in the world right now, and, you know, so many young people that if you just kind of imagine what we could do in telling our children the truth, how better the world could be like within 10 years, you know, within 5 years, and some of them to make better choices, you know, real quick. So that's kind of what, you know, I've been teaching across the country to non-natives and natives.
Thank you, Wendsler. I appreciate that. And I want to give others an opportunity to speak with you. What a rare opportunity to be able to ask questions. So I want to invite our listeners to turn your cameras on, and this is your opportunity to get a point of clarification or to ask a question to Wendsler. I also just want to reiterate what I heard about the good life, which is a life that's not made on decisions around financial security, but consistent with the whole, which is the mother, living in reality, understanding that we're inextricably linked to the earth and to each other, mutual dependence, understanding that making decisions that are based on economic security lead to unhappiness, and that's not the good life. And also, the other thing I heard was capitalism, the process of capitalism has defined elements in the earth, specifically minerals like gold and silver and ore, copper, because those things have financial value. So they have been commoditized. And those things that are crucial to our survival, like air and soil and water, they have no value in our world because they haven't been turned into a commodity. So while land is a commodity, we don't commoditize soil, which is what we actually need to live and to grow food that's nourishing to our bodies. And I also heard you say it's important to turn away from the products of colonization that are causing us to be sick, including what we put in our bodies in terms of processed food. So I really hear an emphasis on being able to be connected to the earth, not in some abstract way, but in a really concrete way, all the way to how we are determining what food we put in our bodies. So thank you, Wendsler. And so I want to offer the opportunity, I'm opening up the chat, for other folks to ask questions. What questions would you like to share with Wendsler?
I was wondering if you would be willing to say a little bit more. One of the things that I heard through what you said was sort of about the way to make one's own life better is when you need to have the foundation from your former generation. So you have to have knowledge and understanding and connection to former generations, and that sort of the best way to make your own life better would be through the next generation. So having a more less of a view of this moment in time and more the connections throughout time. I wondered if you wanted to say any more about that. And thank you so much for sharing what you know. Very much appreciate it.
I think that, you know, there's been a lot of examples. There's been a lot of Christian people who have come throughout the country to help us here at Oak Flats. And what they find is more of an emptiness for themselves because they can't relate to what we're doing. And we did have a religious professor come from Wake Forest one time. And, you know, he was with me, walked, you know, did things with me for like 2 days. Then we went into the ceremony. And then like halfway through the ceremony, I kind of looked at him and he was crying, you know, like emotional. And then after the ceremony, I went up to him and he got more emotional. And this is what he said. He says to me, he says, you know, Wendsler, he says, I came, I was with you the last day and a half, and then you went into the ceremony. And I never ever felt this outside feeling. He said, it's like a glass came over all you people, all of the people that were praying. And I was out here and I didn't know what to do. He said, of course, I had my Bible in my hand, but my Bible, even though there's things in there, it related to what you were doing, but you were actually doing what the Bible was saying. And I felt an outside. Mm. Then I told him, I said, well, you have to put your Bible down and step in with us. Mm. You know, I said, that's that colonization that has put you in the frame. And it stuck you there. And I said, and the reason why, I said, let me explain. Oak Flats, Mount Graham, these are places that have angels, but they took us off these places and exiled us and put us on a reservation. And now on the reservation, they make us perform our religious ceremony. They bring us bathrooms, they bring us water lines, and there's roads to the place, and you can sit in your car. And then it's a 4-day ceremony, but when evening is done, everybody gets in their car and they go home. And then they take a shower and they come back. And even the medicine men will go home. And the only one that's left there is the girl. I said, but in these holy places, nobody can go home. All those things are stuck to the back. And everybody stays there in the sacred place. I said, my point is that, and I said, and forgive me if I'm wrong, and correct me if I'm wrong. I said, but your Bible comes from all of that. All the things that happened in the beginning created your Bible. I said, so from what I hear from the corporations in America today is that they're happy that you go to the church, they bring you the bathrooms, they bring you a building, they bring you your statues, they bring you your pictures, and they're happy you're right there. As long as you don't go back to where God created or there's a spiritual connection happening for you. So I said, that's the fight with the Indian people, because they were doing the same thing to us to make our church on the reservation, which was a prison that they placed us, but they're mad because we're going home back to where God touched the world. So I was telling him, I said, Steve, I said, step in, touch it. I said, and so that's one example here. The other one was another preacher actually listened to my advice, and he disappeared for a whole year. And because he had been here for like 3 years straight, and all of a sudden he was gone, and he returned a whole year later. He actually went back to find himself, and he found out that he was a Viking. So when he went back to the other side of the world and told the people what he was searching for, and he came back, he told me, he said, Wendsler, it was crazy. All my people that I come from accepted me back in, and they were showing me this and showing me that. And he goes, I didn't even know we had that. He goes, here I was a preacher, I learned the Bible. He goes, and I remember we asked him to pray, and when he prayed, the Apache guys around, the older gentleman looked at him and said, Steve, he said, for the first time, I can really appreciate your prayer, and then we had another guy who played a violin or flute, not a violin, what do they call it? Like a violin? Fiddle, yeah, because they call it a fiddle. And so he said how much that changed his life, because the fiddle, he was able to play the ancient songs, the music. So what I was telling them is that it's just going back and touching your identity where you come from, because that's where you're rooted. I said, there's nothing wrong to reroot yourself from the other side. And now you're here. Now you know where you come from. Now you're never going to be lost. But if you're under the system of being an American, you're lost because you don't know who you are. I said, why do you think this country is going crazy right now? Because there's an identity problem. And it's sad to say, but that's the problem we have. It really comes from that, because these people are trying to live a false lie, a false foundation, an illusion, and it's catching up. And I guarantee you, though, their children are going to heal, because they're going to realize that that's what their parents stood for. And now they're going to be saying, hey, wait a minute, there's something better than this, that I don't want to be like my parent. That's why I was saying we watch our parent and we'll make it better. But we got to be there to show them the avenue. If we're not there to show them the avenue, then, we're not going to be in a good position. But I think, to me, it's always the identity that ties you to the earth.
Others, I want to give others an opportunity to make a comment or to ask Wendsler a question. I also just want to plug the opportunity to go and visit Oak Flat. I know you've been there, Wendsler. I had a profound spiritual experience there. It is truly the place of the angels. If you have an opportunity, of course, the coalition is there and would really encourage you to consider going and love to accompany you in figuring out that process. Other comments, questions?
Thank you so much, Wendsler, for sharing your spiritual wisdom and all you are with us. Near the end, I'm very intrigued with, and I would like to hear a little more about how you pass on and teach children and let them know there's choice, that they have a choice and so on. How is that? Can you say more about the passing on the wisdom of calling, giving them opportunity, but know their need to make choices about how to live that?
I think, you know how they always say, having an example and living by that example is really important, because people got to see that you're really committed to it too, you know, that it really does exist. And I say that because, you know, going back 40 years ago, in my lifetime, you know, there were young men with movements that were hardcore, you know, resist, use anger, you know, use profanity, you know. And here I am, you know, they see what I'm doing and they look at me and like, he's not even doing anything. He's not even like yelling at the system. He's not using profanity. He's not tying himself up. But how is he getting so far so quick? And so they come around me and start following me to all these places, and they begin to hear me talk. But not only hear me talk, but to come back to Oak Flats and be that person that I am. And then they begin to change. You know, they begin to see their purpose in life. But it goes with a lot of talking with them every evening, you know, at that time, evenings, about the children, about those yet to be born, about why we're here. What is our purpose? You know, what are we doing? Then, of course, I have to talk about the colonization and capitalism, that it's really a false image. And then I talk about being suppressed and being angry and being hurt. But I tell them, it's not just you, it's everybody. And as she said earlier, then talking about food, which people never think it's important. But I tell them about the sugar process that is in all the food. I say, if you think about it, a lot of our people, not just Native people, but there's a lot of people that are becoming diabetic or pre-diabetic. I said, but even before you get there, everybody's walking around drugged with sugar. So we're not thinking right. I said, so the earth is so critical because the earth is the medicine that heals our body. So I think, you know, it's really important that I tell them that, you know, you can go out and do the same thing I'm doing. You can set the example and listen, you know, be open-minded and listen to them. And I mean, I think that's why we have, you know, so many people following Oak Flats, not because of what we're putting in the ground for them, the reality, you know, the reality of choices. And I always like to end with evil. I said, so when we talk about colonization, capitalism, we talk about, you know, this evil, we talk about all these different things. I said, but if you look at society, I said, they tend to try to put evil over there, evil over here, or a picture, this is evil, you know, they try to put it elsewhere. I said, but what you all got to remember, I said, God created evil too. It's here. I said, but the old people, I said, which is so true. I said, the evil is in us. You create it. I said, so it's told to me when I was young, you have two cars, no drivers. One is good, one is bad. It's which one you're going to move today. I said, and if you look at decisions that are being made, and I just used this example a couple of weeks ago, I said, when Pence former Vice President Prince decided not to follow Trump and support him, how that just ricocheted all over the country when he stepped out of the box and say, I'm not supporting this guy. I said, well, that's how it's described to us. I said, is that we make evil. We make it. And I said, then using like what's going on in Gaza, where all these kids are being killed. I said, when I see this little girl being pulled from layers of concrete, I said, that's colonization, that's capitalism that's killing her. I said, you have to wake up to that. So I think that this new message is really important to everyone. I know we all have it. It's a matter of not being afraid to talk about it and to say it. Mm-hmm. And I just came back from Yale, where a lot of them were telling me that I was the only one that talked about capitalism. When everybody was putting out the election 2024 issue, I sat there and I listened to all that was said, and then they gave every session an opportunity that if you had a question to the president, to those who are running for presidents, what would they be? So it finally came to my turn. Everybody was talking about low wages, housing, all this and that, medical care. They're saying all these things. And it came to me and I said, well, my question to the candidates would be, do you know the Mother Earth? Do you know who she is? And so I explained to them that every ounce of your problem you're talking about comes from that, of how they're treating her. I said, you need to know the person's characteristics, the person's belief, because the Mother Earth is the one that provides all the stuff. I said, it's morally. If you can take care of a female and take care of the mother, then that means you're going to be making moral decisions. I said, but if you're just asking them within the arena of capitalism, then that's the answer you're going to get. And that's what you're going to get. But anyway, my point is that it's telling the truth, to everyone, to being truthful. And you find changes coming quick when you tell the truth.
Thank you, Wendsler. I'm gonna just in honor of our time commitment, I'm gonna close there. What powerful final words to close with. And I want to thank you for being willing to connect with us today. And I want to thank our listeners too for being here as we do this work together, trying to imagine a way out of the hypnosis of systems of death and working to identify life and systems of life. We thank you, Wendsler, for choosing to be with us and for being willing to share with us.
Oh, thank you so much. And I apologize. I don't know if Theresa mentioned, we just laid our lawsuit Monday. So it's hitting all over the country right now. We're getting interviews, and we drove back, got in last night really late, about 4. So, but I wanted to make sure I was with you all.
Thank you. And we are with you in your lawsuit and organizing even now, as you know, to engage churches and religious organizations across the country in bringing amicus briefs and supporting your case. So we thank you, Wendsler, and so thankful to be in relationship with you.
Oh, all right. Thank you. Thank you all.
Have a good evening.